President Trump has turned 80 today. He's turned the White House lawn into a giant arena. Lights, cameras, giant Star-Spangled Banners and a 90-foot scaffold that's become known as the Claw, as 160 Pennsylvania Avenue plays host to Freedom 250, as it's officially known, professional cage fighting of the UFC. There are three celebrations in one: Trump's birthday as well as Flag Day, the day that the US flag was officially established back in 1777, and is presented by the President as the opening spectacle of the celebrations to mark 250 years of American independence in 3 weeks' time. It is certainly a break from the norm. We'll get into that in a moment. 50 years ago, for the bicentennial, the Cold War was a dominant anxiety. The US had just withdrawn the year before from Vietnam, and critics argued then the bicentennial effort was not representative. It was an expensive exposition out of step with troubled times. And this is a snapshot of how the US network W New TV covered the events of 1976 in New York.
Young families, older people, in many cases grandparents, parents, children, celebrating together. And if you talked to them, you found they articulated what your eyes were seeing: a patriotic euphoria, bitter, angry, controversial years forgotten, at least for this moment, unity, reborn pride.
Are you a patriotic nut?
No, not at all.
Then what happened to you?
We just got caught up in the feeling. I didn't think I was going to care, and then when the day came, there we were. Just felt great.
The mood is terrific. The celebration is extraordinary, and people are feeling back like it was 20 years ago. I hope you keep it up.
I spent 7.5 years at sea, Gabe, and on all the travels around the world, I never saw anything as incredible as this. Just fantastic.
Everybody is in the spirit of the birthday mood. Yesterday morning on the train, one lady came in and said, "Happy birthday, everybody," and everybody chimed in and singing "Happy Birthday, America." It was a beautiful spirit.
Fast forward to the 250 prelude UFC spectacle. This is how some in Washington today have been reflecting on this moment.
It's part of America 250. I just think under everything that's going on globally, it just kind of feels like wrong time, wrong place, wrong priority. I really want to support it. It just kind of feels wrong inherently right now. I would wish there was less happening in the world, and I would probably feel a little better about it.
I guess entertainment's entertainment, but I don't know if those are the most important issues that our country needs to focus on right now with the current state of the world.
I don't watch boxing. I guess as long as the city is safe and people are interested, it's a free America.
Let's bring in Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, author of the best-selling Trump's 10 Commandments, Strategic Lessons from Trump's Leadership Toolbox. He's also a professor, Senior Associate Dean for Leadership Studies at Yale University at the Yale School of Management. Great to see you, Jeffrey. Welcome to France 24.
Gavin, it's fabulous to see you, and it's fabulous to see you with France 24. There's no better international news operation out there. It's editorial independence and accuracy are remarkable. And I'm glad to see you there.
Good. It's great to have you with us today. Tell me one thing. When you're watching this spectacle play out on the White House lawn right now, if you're watching, what are you thinking?
It is pretty vulgar. The grandiosity is something you wouldn't see in Paris or London. You do have to give it a little bit of credit that UFC is now perhaps about to overtake the National Hockey League as the fourth biggest sport in the U.S. It's the NFL, the National Football League, of course, and the NBA basketball and Major League Baseball. This is about half the revenues of the others, but it's edging up there. So it's got a large following. You have to admit that. But it's a no holds barred, no rules matter, pretty dirty sport. And to have this, you wonder what's next. Could mud wrestling be any lower to have on the White House lawn? And architecturally, this pretty ugly claw that they have planted there is divisive enough. But as you look back at the anniversary earlier in the clip showing a contrast of then and now as a bicentennial versus looking at the 250th. A lot of people in the country don't see this as unifying as that one was. Mm-hmm. Somehow there's a sense that, are we celebrating the beginning of this republic, or are we perilously close to showcasing the near end of the republic with a lot of the kinds of things the Trump administration is doing? But this grandiosity is very much focused on Trump. Nobody ever called Alexander III of Macedonia Alexander the Great until he called himself that and invented his face. And that's what Trump is doing, is this grandiosity.
That's a very salient point, actually. You've consulted 5 US presidents. You've known President Trump for a quarter of a century. And to the point you make, you've described him recently as a master of illusion. You said that Harry Houdini has nothing on him. Is this event, you touch upon what your thoughts of the event as a spectacle in itself, but is it smoke and mirrors? Is this distraction? Or do you think this is a genuine legacy moment that he wants to be remembered for?
You have managed in one sentence to capture 4 key chapters accurately. You get an A on the final exam. You don't have to take it. From this book is what you've just featured is the divide and conquer success that he has. He doesn't like NAFTA, NATO, the USMCA agreement that he even created himself. He likes to stoke fights. But Keir Starmer and I think Merz in Germany, of course, Emmanuel Macron, and perhaps especially what we see Mark Carney do is a certain unity that challenges him, is that you can beat a bully with this unified collective action. So he moves on to try to change the subject. Instead of talking about Greenland anymore, thanks to the and the EU, the UK, and Canada standing up with a unified voice, he's backed off. But going after Venezuela, and not that Maduro was a person you want to defend, or going after Iran is just distraction. But is that people don't want to talk about the prolonged war, whatever's going to happen to the agreement, as you highlighted earlier in the show, and the problems in the U.S. with the scandals, the Epstein files, and financial affordability, economic issues. He likes to change the subject, and that's what's going on here. He uses this grandiosity to change the subject. And it is there's something called the sleeper effect that's been studied for decades. You just keep pounding and pounding information, and eventually people start to follow that, and that's what he does. It is quite effective, but really alarming.
A relentless narrative, and if you keep that relentless narrative going, perhaps that we're seeing to some extent with Iran, which I'd like your thought on.
What we see is that 18% of the country believes that in the state of Ohio that we have refugees there that are eating their neighbors' pets, even though the very popular and smart, honest Republican governor of Ohio says it's not true. The mayor of Springfield, Ohio, the town where this is in question, says it's not true. The police chief says it's not true. And still 18% of the United States, because President Trump says Haitian refugees, who are largely legal, documented refugees, are eating their neighbors' pets, they believe it. Mm-hmm. Same thing about the 2020 elections. Even though 64 U.S. courts, including those dominated by Trump appointees, say these elections were fair and free, his own cabinet said so, the U.S. business community said so. There's no evidence that there's any systematic election fraud then. But because he lost in 2020, he keeps pounding that. So a quarter of the United States has questions about election integrity, which is horrifying. That's what has people so worried. He's managed to out-manipulate constitutional law experts in the United States. We thought we have this airtight law, but it's not so perfect. As Tocqueville told us, Alexis Tocqueville, great French jurist, came to study us, legislator, said it's the looseness of our laws that matter. We need to have people of integrity, of high recognition to certify the truth, and that's the problem right now.
And it's worth setting out, Jeffrey, your position. You've written this critical analysis in your book, as I say, best-selling, Trump's 10 Commandments. It's about his leadership. You've also written this week for Time magazine, quote, how Trump keeps exploiting legal loopholes. I want to touch on both, but it's worth saying, you've said your goal isn't political. If you're watching France 24 right now and thinking, oh, he's taking sides, he's got, quote, Trump derangement syndrome, as Trump would say, you're not taking sides. I think I'm right in saying it was Jared Kushner that suggested to you to write this book.
It's extraordinary, yes. I was the original critic of the Apprentice, which had nothing to do with politics, the TV series, and I just thought the elimination game premise was not a good way to pick a leader of a team. If they're selected, as that TV show would do back in 2004, is suppose somebody's elected for destroying their own team, then how in the world is that the model for leadership? And we wound up in a pretty wild exchange for a while, but then we became friends out of it when I suggested that if he took attractive young, engaging young millennials out and and put in these fallen celebrities that then nobody wanted to emulate that perhaps the model would survive, and I wouldn't have to be a critique in the Wall Street Journal and everywhere else. So we became friendly. And in 2015, he was constantly checking in with me about should he run. I didn't think he should, but nonetheless, we're in touch pretty much daily. When he won, many of the CEOs who walked out on our CEO summits when he would come in the room were now coming to see him. So he wanted me to go by Trump Tower to see that they are coming to bless him. But then there are times where he and Jared Kushner's asked for help in the creation of the Abraham Accords. When they get it right, and sometimes they do, I like to be fair-minded and celebrate that. And I've worked very closely with Jared Kushner, Ivanka Kushner as well on different fronts. And this was historic what they did in the Mideast. Of course, it's a shame what happened after the Hamas invasion, and the Israeli response has created quite a difficult situation we don't need to go into now. But I think the Trump administration has sometimes gotten it right. I've sometimes supported them. And in fact, he quotes me on Truth Social favorably from time to time. And so far, unless something goes wrong on this show, I haven't been arrested and I haven't had a tax audit. But hopefully you won't inspire that. But it was Jared who said, "You understand my father-in-law better than anybody. He's unorthodox. He isn't like other CEOs. He does things as a negotiating style. Instead of building trust, he'll take a big green log and smack you in the nose and draw blood. He thinks that that's how, so everything else will look reasonable later. Things like that, the divide and conquer approach that he uses is that instead of building alliances, this is something which I've understood about him. His critics don't understand, many of his critics, and in fact, many on the left constantly, because he's ignorant. He wouldn't win the geography contest at the Sorbonne or at Harvard or Yale or even his own school, Penn, University of Pennsylvania. But he's still not stupid, is that he learns fast. There are a lot of things he hadn't studied. He's not a big reader. Thankfully, he maybe hasn't read my book and just likes the book jackets, and maybe that's why I'm okay. But he is a quick learner, and his critics constantly underestimate him. They don't understand. Constitutional law experts that I've run this piece by, that you just flagged from Time Magazine, this issue, admit I'm right, is that none of them anticipated that the Constitution, United States Constitution, doesn't really define what is a U.S. national emergency that could justify some pretty horrific things with the midterm elections coming up, in use of force or in discouraging voters access and things. That in terms of granting pardons, that what kinds of criminal thugs can be granted this, even preemptively in advance of doing some awful things, could be excused legally. They didn't realize how loose our laws are on that front. And on the trade front, he's been quite clever. Or these interim appointments that to bypass oversight by the United States Senate, where they're supposed to be confirmed by the Senate, but he'll do these sequential interim appointments, which are good for 7 months, and then he could do something which will allow another 2 years added on. But if it's a different person, he can get through his whole administration by avoiding the checks and balances people thought should be there. So this is problematic. Not that he knew the legal answers, but it's the old throw the pasta against the wall and see what sticks. And in an unorthodox way, he keeps pushing and pushing. Some have referred to him as the Roomba president, that he hits a wall, he bounces off of it like the Roomba house cleaner.
And to that point, I mean, you mentioned a number of things. And I think you've said, when it comes to your critique of Trump, about 2/3 of the time, I think I'm right in saying, actually, it doesn't. You wouldn't advocate it, as you made clear. But actually, there are times you think actually he's made a success of things. But when you talk about things like Venezuela or the ICE raids, or even what we're looking at with this cage fighting, testing laws and legal limits all the time. And you get to this in your latest article, and it's worth reading because you go into minutiae. This is a real deep dive, not just his presidency, but his own career as well. And particularly in his presidency, though, that the laws that have held him back, how he'd stayed ahead, using terrorism, invasion, rebellion, emergency terms for emergency powers. And let me quote your article here. You quote Jonathan Swift from 1707, remarking, "Laws are like cobwebs which may catch small flies, but the wasps and hornets break through." That Trump is a hornet.
He definitely is, and he'll look at Viktor Orban, or he'll look at Bolsonaro in Brazil, Orban, of course, in Hungary, and he'll think, they shouldn't have conceded. They should have challenged elections and challenged their removal. That's alarming that he looks at that with pride. He sees President Zelensky, who I admire enormously, suspending elections during a war. During the Civil War in the United States, President Lincoln was up for election. So we just don't know what he's going to test next. That could be quite frightening. And it's really important to have a little bit more imagination than his critics do. They chortle about his implosion and he slurs words and they think he's suffering some severe decline in his rationality. I've known him for 30 years. I'm the only leadership scholar to ever have studied him. Plenty of political scientists and plenty of historians and plenty of psychiatrists, or at least psychologists, will use language to describe him. Throwing the language around, I don't call him names. It's important just to understand, though, what he does. And no, I don't. This is not a political treatise. It is a leadership discussion of what he does and how he gets away with what he does. He has the 10 rules his entire life that he uses, and he constantly goes back to these as his safe levers. And if people can't counter him if they don't understand them. But as Jared Kushner said, even his supporters waving flags and honking horns don't help him. And his critics calling him names certainly don't beat him that way. You need to understand what he does. If he constantly pumps out false information, then critics need to be prepared to get the truth out in accessible ways. He uses insults a lot, which seems childish, seems infantile, and it is. But he breaks through the information clutter through this kind of sloganeering that there's a visceral reaction that physiologists have studied that when you see really insulting, offensive behavior, a lot of times we're embarrassed and we laugh a little, but you get through the clutter. I'm not suggesting people insult back. In fact, I'm not suggesting in this book that any of these 10 tools somebody else should follow in their own leadership rise. Rather, that these are tools to understanding what Trump does. If you want to counter him, you have to beat these tools, the divide and conquer. And I just think that the EU, the UK, and of course Canada have shown that especially well. It's just one of a number of examples. Within the U.S., there have been times where I have mobilized the U.S. CEO community. They will pick their battles. Will they rise and save democracy again in 2026? We don't know. But I know in 2020, in the elections that Trump said were false because he didn't like the results, the CEO community came out. The 100 largest companies called me to ask them to bring them together with 12 hours notice, which we did. They came out with a very strong statement announcing the integrity of the elections and the reality of what happened that supported all the court decisions and the endless ballot recounts. But when the CEO spoke out, that's when President Xi Jinping of China and even Bibi Netanyahu of Israel, much to the horror of President Trump, and President Bush, 43 of the United States, and even before U.S. political leaders could speak out, the CEOs certified what the truth was. And again, it was in Democracy in America in 1830 that Alexis de Tocqueville from France explained our own democracy to us, is we have to have what Tocqueville called social capital. That's as important as financial capital. That's the foundation of truth. So we have to have clergy, CEOs, public officials speak out and certify what the truth is. That's how you'll counter Trump. And that's what the book talks about, is how do you take on a bully? How do you counter him? What are the tools that he has used? I don't think that Trump has studied a lot of the political theory and psychological theory of mass communications, but he's figured it out. People say he's dumb. He's dumb as a fox. And that's what's often missed. And that's what we argue has to happen here. And this grandiosity, why are we seeing such a spectacle today, as you point out, on his birthday and on Flag Day, as you point out, the commemoration of the United States flag in 1777? Why do we see this? Is he's big on these symbols of this notion of his immortal legacy. To my amazement, in your opening, you used the language legacy. I'm so pleased. If we weren't so far apart, I would hug you. You got it exactly right. Is that some people measure their success, politicians, by electoral wins, by legislative wins, by popularity polling. For him, of course, there's a lot in terms of personal finances and what some call it a kleptocracy of what he makes by snagging money on the sidelines of his deals that seem to violate what we call emoluments clauses of separation of conflicts of interest. But what he really cares about is his lasting legacy. His two favorite movies and this is for extra credit now, are Citizen Kane and Sunset Boulevard. Those are his two favorite movies. They're both very dark, almost cinema noir movies that happen to do with very prominent figures who've lost their legacy. They've been forgotten, and they're laughed at. The only thing he hates worse than losing money is losing pride. So he's trying to cement himself in history with all these monuments, whether or not they're bills or buildings or bridges or monuments of any sort. It is as futile an effort as we're reminded in Shelley's famous poem Ozymandias, which is supposed to be Ramses, the pharaoh Ramses, too, buried in the sands of time. And a passenger, a passerby comes by and sees this statue, and the plaque says, "Look at my visage, look at my face, and behold in fear because of my vast power." And of course, he has no vast power. He's buried in sand, and Shelley was making fun of it. But that's what's driving Trump, is this consumed by his concern about an immortal legacy.
Look upon me, Almighty, and weep, Ozymandias. A very interesting point. Here's the thing as well, it's worth saying, Jeffrey, you mentioned Benjamin Netanyahu. We look around strongmen leaders, Putin, Xi. You said Trump is the most consequential of our times. And I mention this to you because you've talked about the 10 commandments that he goes by, and the art of the deal being one, the shock and awe initial negotiation strategies. We're seeing this play out with the regime in Iran. But here's the thing, are we at the situation now when all the way to the end, and I quote Trump from 2020, where he said that Iran has never won a war, but it's never lost a negotiation. The fact is, if the Iranians are likely to have read your book, they're likely to have read everything about Trump, and therefore, in this chess game that's playing out politically with huge global consequences, the problem is that Tehran knows Trump's 10 commandments?
I think it could well be. We know for a fact the Chinese have read it. It's been translated into both modern and traditional Chinese. And we know that it's translated into German. We're waiting for the French publisher to come along any day. But the French seem to have figured it out, maybe without a translation needed. And Iranians they are playing him. They know that he invents things with that sleeper effect of pumping out false information. They know not to believe it, for example. They also know when he threatens as a negotiator that he's going to destroy 3 millennia of Persian culture, or he's going to wipe out all their electrical power generation capability, or seize Karg Island, which, by the way, might have made sense. They know that he's not going to follow through on some of these things. Part of it is because he had so many naval assets misplaced in the Caribbean for foolish reasons, and the whole Venezuelan caper, that he couldn't take Karg when he had the momentum to do so, to really control 80% of their oil production. So that's that's an issue. I think the Iranians have figured it out, and they think that time is on their side. 83-year-old Mick Jagger might not still be singing "Time Is on His Side," or perhaps shouldn't be. But the Iranians may think that they have their conventional warfare disabled, but they still have the opportunity with the Straits of Hormuz and with those enriched nuclear facilities, uranium and things, that perhaps they can wait him out. And that is something which haunts Trump, and it is a significant concern. How is he going to beat them that way as they are figuring out his antics? And not a lot of people have figured it out. Frankly, the U.S. Republican Party hasn't figured it out. The divide and conquer schemes that he has used, the U.S. business community. We think of the biggest names in business. Just between us, Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, Brian Moynihan of Bank of America, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, David Solomon, the CEO of Walmart, Coca-Cola. In fact, there's no more global expression in any language, pardon the French, as we say, than the expression "okay." After that is the expression Coca-Cola. Yet he's attacked them, this great symbol of American hegemony, ubiquitousness. The product, Harley Davidson's motorcycles, were 100% made in the United States. However, when they couldn't get Harleys into the UK, into the EU, because of reciprocal trade barriers from the EU, he had to shut down a factory, and the CEO in Kansas City, and open one in Thailand, and ship the Thai product into the EU. Trump was so offended, he told people not to buy Harley Davidsons. Well, MAGA supporters leaned towards Harley cycles, and although interesting, the Harley workers lean somewhat anti-MAGA. The CEO, Matt Levatich, is nonpartisan player, just trying to pilot his company down the middle of the road. With Trump saying that, it was devastating to the company. The stock plummeted, and the CEO got fired. So this is a cautionary tale. So what we see that the Business Roundtable has been somewhat disabled, somewhat neutered as a voice of just 200 business leaders that when they get their act together can be very forceful. But by a divide and conquer scheme, they all get frayed and they go quiet. And that's horrifying. And Trump knows that if he can continually divide them. Interesting, there are other trade groups filling the void. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is starting to find their voice, but it's a much larger fractious group. And the National Association of Manufacturers, which is, I think, 17,000 manufacturers of different interests, at least on trade issues and some things, they found their voice to challenge President Trump.
Yes.
I'll tell you, just between us, I had a meeting, and I haven't said this publicly, 3 days ago with a group of U.S. federal judges that are quite worried about this, as well as the largest economic society in the country of financiers and business leaders, both of these very conservative groups that are quite worried as what we're going to do to prepare for these midterm elections, because they ostensibly wanted to talk about the new book, and I was happy they did, and they bought the book, but they really wanted to talk about, so what? What do we do to prepare? And it's so interesting. You mentioned the Iranians, and I suggest the Chinese have either read the book or my 10 principles were so obvious to them. I don't think it was, because they didn't have it figured out before, but they do now, and that is alarming. So Trump is frustrated. A lot of the things he does are not, even though they sound like they're emotionally impulsive. The insults and the midnight posts from Truth Social, they're not as impulsive. They are standard. Even some of the racial taunts of putting the Obamas in.
This is a very interesting
suits
point, Jeffrey. To that point, if anybody's watching France 24 and trying to understand through the week the cadence, the rhythm, the messaging, you've looked at this, of the messages coming from Trump, and they are very different what comes out on a Monday as what will come out on a Friday in terms of good news, bad news.
If my late mother was alive, Gavin, she would say, you understand my book better than I do. You've pieced together that so well and sequenced it perfectly. We wrote a Fortune magazine article, although we love Time and I write for them, I also write for Fortune, a Fortune magazine article that said, this is not a bull market, this is not a bear market, it's a Trump market. Like many business leaders, they put the bad news out at the close of the market on Friday, and they see what happens in Asia on the Saturday, in the U.S., and what happens as we look at Europe and on the Sunday. And then Monday, he'll make a corrective measure. And we have seen on dozens of times a market surge on a Monday. We had it last Monday. We had it 2 Mondays ago. We had it. We've seen as much as 22%. There's nobody on the planet, nobody in history, who in one or two sentences can lead to a market surge of as much as 22%. And they tend to believe it. We've even seen the factual traders of the WTI, the oil or Brent oil prices go up or go down based on what he says, which could be quite a departure from the reality of what's actually happened in diplomacy or in world market supply. But he has also a knack for picking unpopular targets. Who is going to defend Maduro? No, he went after Maduro initially because he said there was, Chinese and Russian warships. Well, that hardly even made it into print because that was such nonsense. So then he pivoted and said it was due to drug trafficking. This is a drug interdiction measure. Of course, that was not true either. President Hernandez from Honduras was legally extradited from, after he left office, extradited from Honduras, brought to the United States, faced a jury where he was properly and legally indicted, and then faced charges from those indictments to go before another jury where he, with a fair trial with due process, was convicted and given some 40 years in prison. Trump pardoned him. So much for drug interdiction. And then we actually had evidence of Honduran drugs coming into this country. We don't have any large quantity of Venezuelan drugs coming into this country. Chinese illicit drugs and Mexican illicit drugs coming in here, but he picked an unpopular target. And then he promised regime change, which of course is not happening. And then when the idea of drug interdiction didn't hold up, he then pivoted to say that it was at the behest of the U.S. oil industry. So I used my 1-2 punch between my two publications, Fortune and Time. I put out a piece in Fortune within the hour that happily they took that quickly, that said, I can't believe the U.S. oil industry would want to reify these ugly American images from the 1950s, where some companies, and this is all documented, so don't get worried about any litigation, it's all documented, that Gulf and Western ITT, but especially the companies now under the brand names of Chiquita and Dole, were helping with the United States government to undermine often democratically elected governments in Latin America. Is who wants to conjure that up? And so I put that out there, but then I called the heads of the oil industry and I said, I just put this article out in Fortune. Here it is. I didn't put your names in it. Unless you think I made a mistake, because I have an article coming out tomorrow in Time. If you're involved in this, then I'll have to correct the record. And they said, no, 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 to a person. We don't want this. We don't want to violate the legal sovereign integrity of another country, whether or not we liked Venezuela or not. We have no reason to go in there. But also, we're not attracted to that heavy, sour crude oil, as it's called, that can't be refined for the most part into gasoline anyway. It's a thick, it's good for lubrication, and it's good for asphalt. And we get a better, cheaper, reliable supply out of Canada. It's more than twice as much to extract that unattractive oil in the antiquated equipment that is in Venezuela. So I said, well, you better tell him that, or I'll put it in the article. So they did. They didn't tell him directly yet. They told his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who the very next day on George Stephanopoulos' show was underreported, corrected the president. He didn't say the president lied, but he said what the president said 7 times the prior day as the oil industry behest. That wasn't the reason. And similarly, Secretary of Energy Chris Wright mildly corrected it too. So Trump pulled in the entire oil industry into the White House for one of those dear leader meetings to go around the table blessing whatever he said. And they didn't, to a person. They said, no, Mr. President, it's uninvestable. He was furious. So he moved on, gave up on Venezuela, no regime change, no human rights issues addressed there. He's moved on to Iran, of course. Who's going to defend the former Ayatollah, the enriched nuclear energy capabilities with that enriched uranium, which is at 65% enrichment? Some say enough to already be quite problematic, that the Enola Gay nuclear bomb could have had something of that category. And the proxy terrorists, of course, for Hezbollah and the Houthis and Hamas that Iran has been funding. Who's going to defend that? So he picks these unpopular targets, and that's very clever.
Jeffrey,
and it distracts attention from everything that the United States domestic politics wants to talk about ahead of the midterms. It does.
You give us pause, a lot of pause for thought there. Is brilliant, really interesting to talk to you. Thank you for your time today, Jeffrey. I would say I'd let you get back to watching the UFC, but I'm not sure you'll be watching it today.
Thank you, Gavin. I think I owe you and France 24 a significant commission out of any book sales, because you have captured it. And I don't mean to be flattering you, but no, I've done 1 or 2 interviews on this book. Nobody has captured the entirety of it as well as you folks just did.
You're very kind. Jeffrey, we will talk to you again. Great to talk to you tonight. Thank you.